So once you've gone through this and you've listened to it, you've made all the editing choices that you need, you make sure that everything's lining up, all the levels sound good, then you're ready to publish this. So what we'll do, first you want to make sure that you save it. That's really, really important that you save it. Then you go up to the share menu, and you can do this a few different ways. You can send the podcast directly to iTunes, and it'll go in your iTunes library. You can send your podcast to iWeb, so that if you made a website in iWeb, it'll send it directly there and make a page for you. Or you could export the podcast to disk, which is what we're going to do. Couple things here to point out. You want to make sure that the AAC encoder is selected as opposed to the MP3 encoder. If you have the MP3 encoder chosen here, then you won't have your artwork displayed. So the AAC encoder needs to be chosen for this specific podcast. You also want to make sure that the spoken podcast is chosen here. You'll notice also that all of the artwork is set to 300 by 300 pixels, so that's why I was very, very specific with the sizes that you had to make all of your artwork before importing it into iPhoto. And if it wasn't imported correctly at that 300 by 300 pixel size, please go back, resize your images, put them into iPhoto, and then reinsert them into Garageband. Then we'll hit export. And I'm going to save this to the desktop. Just go straight to the desktop and hit save. All right, so let's minimize this. I'm going to go to, here's my podcast. I'm going to open it in QuickTime. With QuickTime, I'll be able to see all of my images. And we'll just simply hit play. All right, I'm recording. On top of that. So now I have an additional recording in that same track. And I'm just going to hit, instead of the record button this time, I'm just going to simply hit the space bar. That not only stops, so I hit the record button and you'll see again the playhead moves, the recording grows, and I'm going to hit the space bar. Okay, so that was the podcast that we just were working on, and you'll notice that the images did display, the levels weren't too off. I probably would have gone back to change the echo, maybe adjusted the levels somewhat, but that's basically what we're going for. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is to go through with your own example that you've been working on along with this tutorial, and I'd like you to share it, export the podcast to disk, and don't forget to save it to the desktop, because once we save it to the desktop, if this was just an example and not a real podcast that you were producing, you would just simply drag it to the trash and get rid of it, because you don't need that anymore. You especially don't need it taking up space on your computer. Now, if you were working on a real project along with the tutorial, then go ahead, keep working, make sure everything looks great, and then you can go ahead and share it. So those are just the basics of podcasting in GarageBand, and I wish you the best of luck in creating your own podcasts. Just remember that for the podcast for our class, you want to make sure that you have all of your photos and your audio in iTunes and iPhoto before we get started. As you could see, you needed all of those assets loaded into the media browser before you pulled them out and worked with them in GarageBand when you made the podcast itself. Again, if you have any questions, you have lots and lots of resources. You have classmates, you have me, you also have the manual that I provided, you have this tutorial, and you also have lots of resources on our class website. So please do not hesitate to access any of those resources. All right, best of luck to you all.